So welcome to today's conversation on Europe, which is sponsored by the Center for European Studies and European Union Center, as well as the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dario Gaggio, the director of the center, and I also teach in the history department. So today we have the great honor and pleasure to welcome one of Europe's most innovative and courageous political figures, no question about it. Someone who has, with remarkable success, rejuvenated German politics. I wish that the opposition in my own native country of Italy had a political leader like you. I don't know if you can cross the Alps and help out. I don't know. I thought I would ask. I'm not expected to say it, to get a positive answer. Anyway, so we're really delighted to have you here today. And the actually, even more delightful task of formally introducing Mr. Özdemir today goes to one of my great colleagues who has a special appreciation for his life work and also who's done a lot of work to make today's event happen. Kader Kunuk holds a doctorate from the University of Paderborn and is assistant professor in the Department of Germanic Languages and Literatures. Her main field is comparative literature, especially in German, Turkish, and English. Her work spans different cultures and historical periods and examines the intersections and contaminations between different worlds and traditions. She has a book forthcoming with Stanford University Press titled East-West Mimesis, German Jewish Exile and Secular Humanism in Turkey, which, among many other matters, traces the plight of German Jewish intellectuals who escaped Nazi persecution by seeking exile and refuge in a Muslim-dominated society. So it's obviously great stuff. And without further ado, I leave the stage to Kader.
Thank you, Dario. I didn't deserve such a long introduction. I'm just here to introduce Cem Özdemir, who I welcome to campus today. He is, as you all know, the co-chairman of the German Green Party, and the party has its roots in the environmental and peace movements of the 1970s and reconfigured its political constellation with the East German party Bündnis 90, Alliance 90, after the fall of the wall. The Green Party was first elected into power many years later in 1998, and until 2005, the Greens helped govern Germany as a partner in a coalition led by the Social Democrats. Cem Özdemir, who was elected to the German parliament in 1994, attracted nationwide attention because he was the first member of the German parliament of Turkish descent. He became, between 1994 and 2002, he was then the Speaker on Internal Matters for the Green Parliamentary Group. In this role, he helped change Germany's immigration policies. Most importantly, he advocated the reform of Germany's citizenship law, which until 2000 was solely based on jus sanguinis, the right of blood. In a country that has struggled to produce leaders from minority communities, Özdemir stands out as a rare politician who has broken ethnic barriers to gain national prominence. In 2003, Özdemir went abroad. He became a transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. and Brussels. Özdemir started conducting comparative research on the kind of political organizations of minority groups in the United States and Europe. He has authored numerous books on integration politics and Turkey's relationship with Western Europe. Cem Özdemir's politics, however, reach beyond minority politics. From the onset, he has been an outspoken advocate of a greener economy, pleads for the reform of Germany's education, and lobbies for a strong European leadership against the renationalization of culture. In 2004, Özdemir was elected to the European Parliament for the first time and was a member for 5 years, served as a co-speaker on foreign affairs for his political group. Among his many other tasks in the European Parliament, he served as a member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. At the highest point of his career so far, he was elected as co-chair of the Green Party in 2008. Together with Claudia Roth, he now leads the Green Party in opposition to the coalition of Christian Democrats and Liberals. Today, he wants to talk to us about the reasons why Germany fell behind and what it takes to get back to the forefront of progress. I'm looking forward to hearing what he defines as progress and progressive politics. Please help me welcome Cem Özdemir.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introductions, dear Dario Gaggio, dear Kader Konuk, dear students, dear friends. It's both a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. After this kind introduction, it can only get worse. I try to be brief in my remarks. I was for 5 years in the European Parliament, and in the European Parliament they teach you to be brief. I didn't belong to a big group, I belonged to a small group. The Greens at that time were smaller than they're today, and that means usually as a speaker for a smaller group, because the amount of time you get is depending on the size of the group. I got usually 1 minute, and I remember my first speech ever in the European Parliament, because I was trained from the national parliament that you always start with addressing the president and then the colleagues, Herr Präsident, meine Damen und Herren. So the time was practically over. And I had to end my speech by just welcoming everybody, because in the European Parliament you also have to welcome the Commission representative, the Commissioner, and the Council representative, and then the President of the Parliament, and then the colleagues. So you can imagine that was my first speech in the Parliament, just welcoming everybody, and people thought, well, this is a very interesting way, you know, these Oriental guys like to be very kind, but they have nothing to say. I hope that you're not going to say that about my speech today. So first part of my speech, I would like to focus on the European Union and where we are heading there, and then the second part about Germany, but in particular about the party I know best because I'm their leader, about the Green Party. We just had, before I came here, the 18th birthday of Helmut Kohl. Helmut Kohl, as you can imagine, was a person who was becoming chancellor when I started to make politics. And I certainly don't belong to the fans of Helmut Kohl, to say the least. On a number of issues, we totally disagreed. I remember in the beginning of the 90s, when it was clear after reunification that there is a second reunification necessary, and that is the reunification with the immigrants and with the descendants of those who moved to Germany as so-called guest workers, including my own background. That didn't take place. Not only that it didn't take place, after the horrible incidents of Solingen and Mölln, where Turkish houses were burned, a lot of people were waiting for signals that he appears at the funeral just as a gesture that Germany is united there. He didn't do that. Well, he's 80 years old. He has an important birthday. So this is not the time to talk about these things or focus too much on these things, because the irony of the history is that today we're quoting Helmut Kohl against Angela Merkel, the current Chancellor of Germany, for the simple reason that we're saying there's a lot to criticize under Helmut Kohl's 16 years of chancellorhood. But on one point, he was always very clear, and that is the European Union. He was always pro-Europe, even in the period of reunification when there was a danger that this whole debate about Germany getting bigger and Germany getting reunified, he was always talking about the European Union, and he was one of the fathers of the euro that then we later got. So that is the tradition that Angela Merkel inherited. If we look today to where Angela Merkel and the Christian Democrats are standing, I would say that unfortunately a lot has changed, but not to the better. Just let me briefly talk about the Greece crisis and the financial and what we got after the financial crisis with Greece. I'm not the one who says, you know, that Greece has no guilt in this debate. I mean, it's certainly clear that Greece and the previous governments, whether it was Nea Demokratia or the current government, PASOK, who governed the country for a long time, practically did everything to ruin the country. And they were quite successful, I have to say that, not as a compliment, obviously. But it's also clear that we also had our involvement in that. It's not that we just watched it happening. Eurostat had all the information available, but they were simply hindered in intervening and saying something, and other European countries simply didn't care. So if you go towards a common currency like the euro, it was also clear that the second and the third step had to follow, but it never followed. So I think we also have some share in this trouble that we're facing in Greece, but other countries are waiting in line for these kinds of turbulences. The kind of reaction we got, in particular in my own country, in Germany, by some tabloid newspaper, asking Greece to sell some of their islands. I don't think it was the real answer to the economic crisis to ask them to sell islands. Obviously, that didn't happen. It's like, asking Italy to give up the Vesuv or something like that, I mean, this is a no-starter for any kind of debate. So you got the kind of counter-reaction from Greece, and this was a tit for tat. And it certainly didn't help deepening European Union. And I didn't hear any word by the Chancellor. I didn't hear any word by her party or the government saying, come on, this goes too far. I mean, we have reasons to criticize Greek governments, but at the end of the day, this is about our common currency, and together we want to save it, and we want to save the European project. So that, I think, is an important difference. I don't want to go too deep into that, since I'm not an expert and since I don't think this really matters maybe here, but I also think it was not right that from the beginning she excluded that the European Union itself will solve the problem. That we went to the IMF without excluding the idea of her own Minister of Finance creating some kind of an EMF, a European Monetary Fund, that she excluded that from the beginning, I think didn't help. Because it gave the impression we cannot solve the problem, we need others to help us there, and I think that was not the right answer. Let me look into the Lisbon Treaty. If I look to the Lisbon Treaty, my observation is that we were all focused so much in finally getting the Lisbon Treaty after the constitutional treaty failed. And we were so absorbed with it that now, since we have the Lisbon Treaty, we do not really know what to do with it. Maybe with one exception, the European Parliament, as you might have followed with the SWIFT agreement, because they're really keen on using the new powers they've achieved and using them also sometimes in a way that the US dislikes, obviously in the case of the agreement on data protection. So I have a feeling that the national governments that were fighting to get the Lisbon Treaty, finally when they got the Lisbon Treaty, do not want to use the tools that are there on the ground simply to use. One example for that is, what about European foreign policy and defense policy? We got Lady Ashton, Baroness Ashton now as the High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs. We're not allowed to call her Foreign Minister, thanks to our British friends. We were hindered to do that. But she could have behaved in a way that she finally becomes Foreign Affairs Minister, but she made clear from the beginning that's not at all her intention. Why was she selected? She was not selected because she had an outstanding CV on foreign policy so far. Not at all. The simple reason why she was selected was that national governments thought she will not intervene. She will leave powers on the nation-state level when it comes to foreign policy. Well, one can argue that. But on the other side, one shouldn't be surprised when President Obama canceled the US summit. I don't think it's good news for us. Was it widely seen as bad development for us? No. Was it brightly broadcasted and commented by people saying, where are we heading to? Finally, we got a Democrat president in the US that we all wished and prayed for to get. Maybe some of you did as well after George W. Bush and the 8 years. But I can tell you, if the European Union would have had a right to vote, he would have got probably 95% or something like that, or even more. And the rest didn't have voted for Republicans. They would have voted for Greens or other parties, but that's another point. So what I'm saying is, well, we got the kind of president we wanted, but for what? Do I see any initiative by the Europeans saying, let's use this opportunity in order to build bridges and work together on the financial crisis to give common answers to that? I don't see that. Do I see any European initiative together with the US vis-à-vis Afghanistan? I don't see that. Do I see any European initiative to get the number that's Mr. Kissinger was always asking for, the number to call on the European side? One thing's for sure, it's not Baroness Ashton. She won't get the telephone call from the State Department of the US. I tell you, if a telephone call at all in the future arrives, it will arrive in in Berlin. Well, I'm sorry, I come from the West. I cannot hide it. And the telephone call will arrive in London and it will arrive in Paris. But the question is, of course, certainly 82 million Germans matter, no doubt about that. 40 million Poles matter, no doubt about that. And if you ask the Cypriots in the south and in the north, some 100,000, they also think that they even matter more and have the most important conflict in the world, which is certainly not true. But they also matter. Everybody matters. But if a European responsible person for foreign policy would speak for 500 million people, that would matter much more. So we're in the danger of losing relevance. That's my point. And unfortunately, we're not really aware of what it means to lose relevance. And this is something we certainly need to change with respect to our future if the European Union, and I think if you look to some policy areas where we're doing relatively well, we could strengthen that and play a crucial role there. If 500 million Europeans would agree where we already have achieved something on environmental standards and go beyond that, this would certainly matter, because 500 million people in the European Union can set standards and again can work together with President Obama and his administration. If 500 million members of the European Union also agree on other policy areas, it certainly matters. Let me give you one more example before I go into Germany and where we are right now in Germany, where I see that we're falling behind, and that is the whole area of education. Of course, we have huge differences inside the European Union. But when you look overall to the PISA study, that was first time happened in the year 2000. In particular, my own country, but also some other European countries did not look very well vis-à-vis equal chances for their immigrants to get part of the mainstream societies. Have we taken the lessons out of it? I doubt that, to be frank. And do we understand that 1,300,000 Chinese, if only 1% of them are extremely smart, what that means as a simple factor for innovation, for new products, and that we're also in the danger to fall behind there? I don't think that we really got that lesson as well. In particular, for my own country, I can say that. So I believe this is also one of the areas where we have to do better. If I talk about Germany and my own party situation, a song that some of you might have heard comes into my mind. You might know Kermit the Frog from the Muppet Show. He used to have this famous song, "It's Not Easy Being Green." Today I would change the song a little bit and would say it got a lot easier to be green nowadays. I remember former times when it was much more difficult being green in these days. There was a time when the Greens used to be described in Germany and in other European countries as the so-called tree huggers. So whenever we saw a tree, we had to stop to hug the tree and ask him how he's doing or she's doing. We have to be gender balanced. And today I have a feeling that that has changed. I see a lot of green huggers nowadays in Germany. When I have interviews with journalists and when I talk to colleagues from other parties, what happens is that people are saying, with whom are you going to build the next coalition in North Rhine-Westphalia? And one of the options that was not on the table a couple of years ago now is one of the most likely options, or at least that's what some journalists are saying, that is a coalition between Christian Democrats and Greens. Some years ago, completely unthinkable. So this is a little symbol of what's changing in Germany these days and the developments my party is taking. I've seen that Joschka Fischer was speaking here. He was speaking as a former foreign affairs minister, having served his country for 7 years as not only vice chancellor, but as one of the most successful foreign affairs ministers of Germany. Unfortunately, I do not stand here as a representative of a governing party. I stand here as a representative of an opposition party. Not only that I represent an opposition party, I represent the 5th largest opposition party in the national parliament, and there are only 5 parties in the national parliament. So obviously, it's the smallest opposition party. But having said that, the bizarre situation is we got the best election result ever in our history. It's like winning a marathon, and you realize that the other guys who you compete with also won the marathon, but even better than you won it. But where are we today? If you look today to the opinion polls, we're around 14, 15, 16%, which is huge, much more than we got. We got 10.7% in the last elections. The Liberals, who got more than 14%, are now around 8% on the national level when it comes to the opinion polls. Christian Democrats are pretty much the same as in the last election, around 35%. Social Democrats are slowly increasing their share after they got one of their worst election defeat in the last election, 22%. Now they're above 25%, around 28% even, so it's slowly increasing. Left Party still is more or less where they've been, a little bit lower, around 10% now, after they got around 12%. And as I said, the Greens are increasing their share in all the opinion polls nowadays. But that, to my opinion, is not the most important figure for my party. The most important figure is, and that leads me to my next point, there was one poll asking people who they could imagine to vote for. And that gave us 48%. 48% of Germans said that they could in theory imagine to vote for the Greens. If you compare this with the other so-called smaller parties like the Liberals and the Left Party, it's way ahead of them. They're around the 20s. So the maximum amount of people saying that they could imagine to vote for the Liberals is around 25%, and it's quite similar to the Left Party. If you look to Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, it's above 50%. That's around what they have. So we're relatively close to the potential of Christian Democrats and Social Democrats that we could reach. Why don't we get that? I think the reason is that we have much more green thinkers in the society, people that behave green, people that do green shopping, people that pay attention to where they buy, what they buy, people that pay attention to their carbon footprint, people that pay attention to behave in a way that is responsible vis-a-vis our natural resources, but simply not all of them vote green, obviously, otherwise we would get much more of that. And that leads me to my point that I'm saying we are in a stage of a kind of a green zeitgeist in Germany. What's the reason for that? Part of the reason is, of course, competencies that we get, and that goes beyond the traditional competencies of climate change, environmental protection. It also adds education policy. Out of the 3 governments that we are now involved in Germany on the state level, we have 2 ministers for education. 10 years ago, completely unthinkable. So the green image is slowly shifting also towards education policies, finance policy. Completely new policy areas are now getting more important. Civil liberties always played an important role for us, but new details came into picture like data protection. We witnessed in the last election that the so-called party of pirates, I don't know whether you have something similar in the US, but we have a party of pirates, not only in Germany, also in other countries. In Sweden, one member of the party of pirates was even elected to the European Parliament. I'm glad that he joined then the Green Group there. In the case of Germany, they got around 2%. So this shows you that there is a new movement, and my party would be bad advised not to take that for serious, because we know from all the studies that these people, mainly young people, by the way, mainly men are voting for the party of pirates. It's interesting, not that many women find it attractive to be a pirate, having only one eye. So most of them are either close to the Liberal Party or to the Green Party. And there is certainly an area where we have to be more careful not to lose that potential. Values matter. For us, ecology obviously is a value, but also social justice is an important value. But the difference from us to mainly the Left Party is that we do not limit social justice to just spending more money for social justice. So, certainly spending more money for people on welfare is important, but that's not the only point. We also have in mind the question, how can we make sure that the children of people on welfare have a chance to have some kind of upscale mobility, which is currently not the case in Germany. Because one thing's for sure, if you are on welfare, the children are very likely on welfare as well. So there is no such thing as what you described, the American dream, the German dream. The dream of that one day, if I work hard, I will do better and I will be part of the mainstream society, my children will go to university, and so on. This is certainly an area where we have to work, including intergenerational justice, including gender justice. But, and this is again a unique selling point of the Greens, also a global justice policy, a global social justice policy, which I believe is also crucial. And of course, attributes matter to my party. Currently, in all the polls, we get the highest points when it comes to credibility, the highest rate of all parties. But having said that, that can easily be lost. So we are aware of that. The funny situation for us that we have growing milieus in the big cities. For instance, in the city where I was running in Stuttgart, we're now number 1. We're ahead of Christian Democrats and ahead of the left of the Social Democrats in the city of Stuttgart. Not exactly like it is in Italy for the Greens, unfortunately. So this is one direction where we're heading to. We have young voters, more female voters, and we have more voters in the milieus of people of non-German origin in Germany. And if you look to changing demographics, that's good news. Bad news is that still until today, those who are above 65 don't vote Green. They vote mainly Conservative, which is also, by the way, bad news for the Social Democrats and for the progressive side. Good news is that our voters get older. So we get a bigger share of the older voters, not because we convince older voters, but simply because we get older. So the amount of people voting Green is increasing. The party itself is changing. Let me give you some stages where we were heading through. In the 80s, that was the period simply to enter parliaments. That was the whole decade of the 80s. The next period where Joschka Fischer played a very crucial role is getting ready for government. That was the whole period of the 90s. Then, and that was already after Joschka Fischer, that I would describe as a period of emancipating from the Social Democrats. That's the year 2000. Even until today, I would say, that still continues. Why do I say emancipating from the Social Democrats? For a simple reason, because we had a government together for 7 years on the national level, we had governments on the state level, we had governments on the local level, and still have some in the state of Bremen. We have the only state government now with the Social Democrats. But we also witnessed that the Social Democrats for a long time treated us as their youth organization, treated us as kids that actually belong to the Social Democrats but took the wrong path and one day have to come back. And if they don't know, if we don't know, they know it, that we have to come back and want to force us. That was the way they treated us also sometimes inside the governments. The current leader of the Social Democrats, Sigmar Gabriel, once said to me when he was elected as new party leader that he himself looked into why some of the local governments in his own home state in Lower Saxony failed, together with Greens and Social Democrats. And it was him, not me, saying that it was practically in all the cases the Social Democrats who didn't stick to agreements, who broke coalitions and who did not deliver what they promised us. So that is one reason, but there is of course another reason, and that is if a party has 22% on the national level and is unfortunately decreasing in a lot of Länder, it would mean for us, if we limit our expectations only to the Social Democrats, that we will stay forever in opposition. Because we cannot win as much as they lost. So the outcome is very simple. Either we open ourselves for a 5-party system, or we will stay in opposition forever. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we now have some kind of balance to all parties. That's certainly not the case when it comes to social policies, when it comes to foreign policy on the national level, when it comes to education policy, when it comes to gender questions and a lot of other policy areas. We're still closer to the Social Democrats than we are to the Christian Democrats, to the other big party of Germany. But we also experienced that in one area where we're very close, both parties are anti-nuke parties. But when you look a little bit deeper to details, the Social Democrats have no problem in building new coal plants, together with the Christian Democrats. When it comes to, for instance, the car industry, I remember quite well that it was Chancellor Schröder at that time who described himself as the Chancellor of all cars. When we reminded them that it was also Social Democrats arguing for a speed limit, Schröder said, this is a no-go area. Don't even mention the word speed limit. I won't do that. Just don't dream about it. So 7 years in power without having a speed limit. Very tough for a Green to accept, because this was one of our promises we've given. Now Germany is still the only country in the European Union without having a speed limit. We're still promising to get a speed limit, but we're still also looking for a potential partner to do that, because nobody else is really keen on doing that. So this is a little example that the Social Democrats might be an anti-nuke party, but they're not a party that I would sum up under the headline of environmental protection and saving the climate. Because whenever it comes to tough decisions, they shy away because they feel the pressure of lobby groups. I mean, having said that, I have to admit it's easy for me to say that because I'm representing a smaller party which doesn't have the pressure of the unions, which doesn't have the pressure of some lobby groups, unlike the bigger parties. So this is the advantage of being green. That's why I said it's easy being green, if I have to correct Kermit the Frog. Let me briefly look into the situation of other European countries. Good news we get these days from France. My friend Danny Cohn-Bendit, but it goes beyond Danny's activities, reached a huge success in the last European Parliament elections when he brought the Greens to 16% in France, which is unbelievable. 16%, that was very close to the Social Democrats, almost second party. In the last regional elections, he had to prove whether that was an accident or whether there's really a tendency going towards that direction. And he got more than 12%, making the Greens in France now, the Ecological Alliance, the third party, which obviously shows a tendency. If we look to other countries like Belgium or Luxembourg, around 20%. We are in power in Finland and in the Catalan region in Spain. About 10% in Austria, in Switzerland and the Netherlands. And as I mentioned in the last European Parliament election, the highest increase of seats and votes for the Green parties running for the European Parliament. Challenging situations we have in the Czech Republic. We were elected to the Parliament, we went into the government, and the next term we were washed out of the Parliament. Currently it's not clear whether we re-enter the Parliament. Some say that we have a chance to enter the Parliament in Hungary. In Greece, we didn't enter national parliament, but we got at least one member of parliament for the European Parliament. First time ever in history from Greece. And if we look to failures, I would say simply practically almost the whole Mediterranean, unfortunately, including Italy, which is very sad for us as a founding member of European Union. And I would say one of the mistakes that our Italian friends did was that they formed a coalition with the communists. Because if you look to the green agenda, you cannot limit it to the radical left. It goes way beyond that. Again, also a more or less failure story is Eastern Europe, with very little examples. We can discuss that, why that's the case. It obviously has socio-cultural reasons. If I look to the role that we have today, to conclude, one of the new situations for us is that more and more we establish dialogue with the business community. The so-called Green New Deal plays a very important role that we developed as a Keynesian instrument during the crisis. But the interesting point is that business community, after the Copenhagen summit failed, did not react in a way that some could have expected. They saw this as bad news, not as good news. For the simple reason that they said it's better for the economy if we have an international agreement, if we have the European Union on board, and if it's clear where the direction is going to, where we're heading to. Unlike some of the parties that are always described as the parties that are close to business communities. So I would say the business community reacted more rational to the failure of Copenhagen than some of their parties that usually are close to the business community, which are now in power in Germany. Let me give you a personal experience I had just before I came to the US. That was in the city of Freiburg, where I was participating in a dialogue with some business people. One of them came to me and said, I have to admit something. I was always against the Greens. I thought the Greens are completely crazy. I thought the Greens are ruining our economy. I think the Greens are pushing business outside our country. But I have to tell you something, I'm earning money. I said, well, that's good news for you. But what has it to do with us? Well, I'm earning money because of you guys. I said, that's interesting, even more interesting, but tell me more. And he said, I'm earning money because you talked in the 80s about things that we were saying this will ruin German economy. But you forced us, and when he said you, of course he didn't only mean the Green Party, he also meant environmental organizations, public awareness that was rised at that time, you forced us to develop our filter technologies. And today Germany, and he is the leader of that company, is #1 worldwide when it comes to filter technologies. Simply because we have, and that is a quote from him, the first mover advantage. So I would say this is certainly an area where we, as Greens and the environmentalists, have to establish more dialogue with the industry and with the business community, but on the other side also the business community needs to see the Greens as potential partners. Currently we have debates in Germany, you might have heard that, about the so-called Desertec project. Desertec is one of the most ambitious projects ever in the post-war history of Germany. Not only Germany, by the way, also other European companies are on board. The plan is to use the desert Sahara in Northern Africa to get energy from there, photovoltaic energy, and to bring it to Europe. And to get at least 1/5 or 1/3 of the electricity consumption of Europe from the desert Sahara by only using a little part of it. Until the year 2050, the plan is that we have 1/4 of our electricity from there. If I talk to these companies, and I had some chances to talk to the leaders of these companies, none of them obviously is agreeing. None of them certainly voted for my party. Maybe they're women or they're children, usually they're smarter, they're women, but they didn't vote for the Greens. So why do they do such huge investments of billions for a project that some years ago everybody would have said that's a dream, it will always be a dream, for the simple reason that they understood there is money to earn and lots of money to earn because that's the future. We have today 16% renewables with electricity. And it's not the Greens saying that in the year 2020 we will have 30% renewables. It's Angela Merkel saying that. If you ask us, we go way beyond that. The think tank of the Ministry of Environment says 38% renewables until 2020. The umbrella organization of the renewable energy industries says 48% renewables until 2020. So it's clear there's a huge new industry growing. We have now 300,000 jobs only in this area of renewables. And again, one of our plans is, if we come into power again, to make huge investments and, of course, stimulus packages that motivate especially landlords to invest into the insulation of houses. Most of the houses in Germany, especially the old ones, are not on the technical standards of today. And this is one of the huge opportunities both to save carbon emissions and to create lots of jobs. So this is one of the directions we're heading to. Again, who will benefit from that? Companies like BASF, which obviously is not a very green company, and obviously on a number of areas when it comes to GMOs, on agriculture, we completely disagree. But we can also find areas where we can work together and have some kind of dialogue. To conclude, I would say, with all the weaknesses I've started, I learned one thing when I was in the US: you always have to end with an optimistic outlook. That's American, not German, please. This is not at all German. I try to bring this over to Germany, but I'm not sure whether I'm successful with that. So let me end by a more optimistic outlook. If I compare us Europeans with the US, we have half the energy consumption, but I wouldn't go so far to say that we have half the living standards of the US. I'm not talking about health insurance, don't worry, not going into details of that debate. We have our own debates there. But I think this is a chance for us to continue to make this a European success story, to have a story to tell that is a low carbon industry. Because unlike in the US, there is a national consensus in Europe that climate change is taking place, and that there is a human involvement in that, and that it's an important thing and a good thing to stop that from happening and to do everything to do that. So this could be one of the movers of the European Union and one of the areas where the European Union can find some kind of a story to tell in the future. Thank you for listening, and now I'm looking forward to your interventions.
I agree with you in terms of lauding Helmut Kohl for being such a stalwart supporter of Europe. I totally agree with you. However, one of the major mistakes was, and not only of Kohl, but other major European leaders, was that they actually never ever included any kind of fiscal policy with the euro. And so by not doing this, the Greek crisis, whether it's Greece or Portugal, whatever, was almost preordained. So I don't mean to be, how should I say this? I don't mean to be supportive of Angela Merkel in this at all. I totally agree with you that some of the German tabloids were really tasteless in terms of what they advocated Greece do. But there is some point about the issue of not having a fiscal mechanism and thereby leading to a serious problem, a very serious problem that Europe, I think, cannot solve, really, without some very, very major interventions. And you could argue in many ways that the euro is, is a wonderful thing on some level, and it was actually a major handicap. If I'm Greek today, okay, I curse the euro big time.
You would what?
I would curse. Ich würde es beschimpfen. If I were a Greek today, okay, I would say, why did we do this? Without the fiscal policy, it's like a straitjacket, and without having some kind of relief mechanism without the common fiscal policy. And that's why I think in many ways the founders of the euro have a lot to account for. And I understand why they did it. It was very clear, to tie France, Germany, Maastricht, the role of Yugoslavia, all of this is very clear, but it was poorly done.
Well, thank you for the question. I think one of the mistakes certainly was that we had some very bizarre discussions about throwing Greece out of the Eurozone, which is obviously not very realistic, and it was a clear intervention for all kinds of speculations against Greece. So that certainly didn't help. I fully agree with what you said, that it was a mistake not to add a fiscal policy after the euro was established. But let's give credit to that also to the following governments and to the following ministers for finance and chancellors. I remember when the financial crisis first appeared, the reaction of Steinbrück at that time, the Minister of Finance, was that it's better if we deal with that on the national level and not on a European level. Or just take the suggestion by President Sarkozy of having a European Wirtschaftsregierung, economic government. Well, this is a follow-up of the Eurozone. In a way, it's without alternative to do that, that you have some kind of coordination of economic measures and policies on the European level. I don't have the feeling that the German government is really behind that idea. Of course, they do lip service and talk about the European economic government, but this is simply because there was so much pressure coming towards that direction, but it's certainly not on our agenda to do that, and I believe that it's crucial. If we want to move further, this is the next step that has to follow, that we need some kind of European economic government where we coordinate our tax policies, where we coordinate our policies vis-à-vis the economy and finances. This is unavoidable, simply. And I don't see the will, because there's this kind of sense we can control that better on the national capital area than if we give competencies to Brussels away. And then you shouldn't be surprised if you get these kinds of results that we have these days. But I agree. I mean, it's simply unavoidable that we have European competencies there. Madam.
You had mentioned that you think there's a possibility of a coalition between the Greens and the Christian Democrats. What kind of changes is your party and possibly the Christian Democrats going to make for the next election to ensure that you both rise in popularity?
Thank you. I would rather talk about the changes that the Christian Democrats have to make and not the changes that we have to make, obviously. Well, let me start by saying it's part of our DNA to be anti-nuke. So this is a no-go area for us to ask us to extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants. We made a consensus when we were in power for 7 years in the red-green area to close the last nuclear power plant in Germany in the year 2022. The current government is struggling to extend that because their friends there want to earn money. And so this is until now unsolved. They're waiting until the state election in North Rhine-Westphalia. There are some people saying, some experts saying, by the way, including a state secretary and the Minister of Environment, which is led by Christian Democrats, they are saying that the Bundesrat, the second chamber, has a say in that. If that's true, it's good news for us. Because if it's true, if the Social Democrats come into power in North Rhine-Westphalia, or if the Greens come into power in North Rhine-Westphalia, it would mean the end of any kind of intervention towards extending the lifetime of nuclear power plants. Because it has to go through both chambers, and will get no majority in the second chamber in this case, so it will stay where it is today. But only in the case that this legal interpretation is correct, which is a very powerful one. So in any case, we will get judicial discussions in Germany after the next election of North Rhine-Westphalia if the coalition of Christian Democrats and Liberals doesn't get a majority, which currently looks very likely. What other points do matter? In the case of North Rhine-Westphalia, obviously, the question of coal plants. There is a plan to build a new one in the city of Datteln, which is very crucial for the current government, but Social Democrats want to do the same. So here we have both big parties disagree with us. So in any case, it would be a tough negotiation. Education policy became, as I said, more important. Here we have really ideological barriers with the Christian Democrats. Not so much for pre-child education. That used to be an ideological barrier when I entered policy. At that time, more or less in my home state of Baden-Württemberg, we had a policy that women should better stay at home, take care for children, and so there is no need for, childcare and so on. That has changed. The previous minister for families, Ursula von der Leyen, Christian Democrats, practically did a policy that we agreed on a number of issues. In particular, that she wanted to build more kindergarten also for children below 3 years. So we supported that. So this is not an ideological debate anymore. Full day schools used to be, again, a very ideological debate. Today there is a broad consensus in Germany. The main problem that remains is now how to finance it, how to get the money for it, and whether the national government has a say in there, which we support. Unfortunately, Christian Democrats and Social Democrats changed the constitution, which to my opinion was a really big sin. Because now, in a country like Germany, with that importance, the national government cannot even spend money towards the local level and the Länder level in order to support them for building full-day schools. And it won't happen without national money. So we have to change the constitution there again. The one ideological point that remains is, what do you do after primary school? And the more you go to the south of Germany and the west of Germany, the more you have this deep-rooted ideological position. After the 4th grade, we have to separate children into different schools. I don't know whether you know that story that the Americans after the Second World War, when they helped us becoming Democrats again and becoming part of the West again, also thought that the school system in Germany has to change in order to make us good Democrats. And one of the points they singled out was that we're separating children too early. And let's be frank, we don't separate them with their skills because one are more intelligent than the others. What we simply do is children of people who went to university go to high schools, and children of working class children of welfare, including unfortunately children of color, go to the lower schools. That's what's practically happening, and it's scientific proven. It's on and on proven. The German school system is a school system that awards those who come from rich families, those who come from families whose parents went to university, and punishes those who don't have that background. So this is an area which definitely has to change, and we have strong support for that by the business community. Business community, not because they like foreigners or because they like working class people, because they simply understood it's bad for German economy because we're not producing enough academics. So they're less ideological there. Christian Democrats privately, when you talk to them privately, admit, we know this is really not good, we have to change it. But how to tell it? Because those who send their children to the high schools think the more working class children are together with their kids, the lower the standards will be. So to make a long story short, I think we can only win that battle if we make sure that this is not a left-right issue in Germany, that we have some kind of national consensus there. So whoever governs, my advice would be, make a coalition agreement, but then, first things first, go to the opposition party and ask them to join that consensus, and even modify the consensus if necessary to have them on board. We witnessed that in the state of Hamburg. In Hamburg, we have a coalition of Christian Democrats and Greens. You would expect, having such a large coalition, so you have those practically the defenders of the high school, and you have the others who want to change the education system. If they agree, you have a national consensus. That's what we fought. What we got was that a lot of the voters of the Christian Democrats backfired that and opposed it and started a referenda, and it really got dangerous for us. Now we have the Social Democrats, the Left Party on board, we have the unions on board, and we have huge parts of the business community on board, and we're facing a referenda soon in the state of Hamburg, which we hopefully will win. But it shows you that this is a very, very hot potato in Germany. And one thing is for sure, if in Hamburg, and I'm sure that we won't lose that, but if we would lose the referenda, most of the Christian Democrats, in particular in the west and in the south of Germany, would not touch this issue anymore, because they would simply shy away from it and say, this is too dangerous. And for us, it would be, let me be careful because some of you are German, for us it would be really difficult then to make a coalition. Because again, this is not really DNA for us, but it's one of the crucial points, because we're deeply convinced that it's wrong to separate children after 4 years. And if this is a condition for Christian Democrats, that it has to stay like that, and for us it's a condition that it has to change, it might get really difficult. Please?
Are you then for a Gesamtschule?
That's a good question.
I mean, I've taught in the schools over there in the 70s, and I always remember, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I taught in various gymnasien in various spots in Germany, and I always found at the time people saying, we have too many with Abitur. I assume by high school you mean gymnasium, not the other possibility.
That was meant.
Of course, the second Bildungsweg did open up a great deal for people to shift and go on in.
I'm one of
you
those.
went to zweiten Bildungsweg.
Yes. I went to Hauptschule in the fifth class until the 4th class. I had the worst marks in German.
Right.
And I was told in the 1st class that I will never finish school.
Right. I mean, as teaching at the university here, I've gotten some people who had similar experiences. But I found myself saying before I left, when I was hearing people saying, we have too many people with the Abitur, and my answer was always, can you have enough?
Yeah.
Educated people. But that is the push. How far has that gone? I even found that at the 7th grade level in the gymnasium, where you then add on that second language, that was also the deciding factor. And then there was another factor in that in the Mittelschule, in the 7th through 10th grade, you had these huge classes. When you got to the Oberstufe, which would be the 11th through 13th, that then the classes were very small, and that the size of the class, and then, shall we say, the addition of that second language in the 7th grade was one of the primary reasons for many students not making it, along with, of course, your Spätentwickler, those who come along much later and wake up. That at a very private school where I had students who hadn't made it, and then of course they woke up later, as kids do, then they were fine. And that's the question. So exactly what does the Green Party want to do in this whole educational thing?
First of all, of course, we very much welcome the existence of Gesamtschulen. And we think that's a good thing. Gesamtschule, for those who don't know that, is the secondary school after primary school, but not separated into different branches. We welcome that. But we also believe that it would be dangerous if the state governments would force schools to unite into a Gesamtschule. Because what you would get then, in this case, would be a dramatic counter-reaction. So, one of the lessons we learned from the recent experiences is you can only do education reform if you have the parents convinced, if you have the students on your side and the teachers on your side. Otherwise, it's impossible.
And you need to start from the bottom. I mean, I always
Sure.
had the feeling when I was there that they put these reforms in, but they came from the top down,
Absolutely.
rather than starting really at the basic school and working on up.
Well, let me say it this way, two remarks. First, there is not one single solution to education reform. It's so many points you have to do at the same time. It's also kindergarten, preschool education that we have to extend. But it also is how do we educate kindergarten teachers? I'm a kindergarten teacher by training. Kindergarten teachers today in Germany don't meet the standards that we really need, because if it's true what all experts tell us, that what you do before you enter first class is as important as what you do after first class, well, then we have to really upgrade the education of kindergarten teachers. But by the way, we also have to pay them better. That's another topic, so that you can really earn your living and can finance a family, which you can't do today with a kindergarten teacher salary. Full day education is important. Later separation of children is important. But also classes where you can, smaller classes, where the teacher has an opportunity to see that children have different speeds. They're not machines that can be prepared for in every course at the same time, at the same level. So we really have to rethink the whole way we educate our teachers. That is one area. The second point is there's good news, and that is changing demographics simply leads us to a situation where in a number of rural areas, but also cities, you don't get enough students anymore for 3 different school types after the primary school. Or I have to say 4 different school types, because you also have the school for handicapped people, by the way, which is another topic which is completely absurd, because we know integrating them into the mainstream school system serves both. It serves the handicapped, but it serves also the non-handicapped ones. So we have to get rid of this 4-track system after the primary school. And the good news is Christian Democrat mayors come to us and say, I don't get enough students for the Hauptschule anymore, because the parents don't want to send their children there. In the 50s, Hauptschule is the lowest level of the secondary grade, of the secondary school. In the 50s, if you finished Hauptschule, you could, if you were hardworking, earn enough money to buy yourself a little flat and to earn enough money to finance your family. Today, this is practically impossible. So it is obvious that this is a dead school. It doesn't lead you anywhere in the future. So what we will get is, just by pressure from the base, what we will get is some schools will unite. So you will get out of the 4 tracks, maybe a 2-track system. 1 track will be what we call gymnasium, which, by the way, has nothing to do with sports, the high school. And the other track will be a secondary alternative, which also leads you to high school level, but gives you more time and maybe is closer to job education and so on. So you have a 2-track system as maybe a first step towards one day having the model that you were talking about. And I believe this could be a model where you get lots of parents, most of the parents on board. And then, of course, it would be also important to maybe go from 4 years to 6 years, as we're doing it in Hamburg, as a primary school. This could be a model where you could get a majority in Germany under most of the parents, and also maybe, inshallah, with the parties. I don't know who was next. Please.
What is the position of the Green Party, or maybe your personal position in making Turkey a full member of the EU?
Well, in Germany, when I get this question, usually I get introduced by journalists or by people introduce me when I go to discussions. They say, you as somebody who is in favor of Turkish membership to European Union. And what I answer then, this is also an answer to your question, is, wait a minute. My position is to be precise. I want Turkey to meet the standards, the so-called Copenhagen criteria. And now comes the but. But if they meet the Copenhagen criteria, I don't want to treat them different from others who more or less did. As in the case of Bulgaria and Romania, I would underline more or less. Less, maybe more than more. So I'm against discriminating Turkey if they meet the standards. We could see it in the recent trip of Angela Merkel. The role she played in Ankara was a complete different one than, for instance, when Schröder went to Turkey. Schröder went to Turkey as a chancellor who was in favor of membership if Turkey fulfills the necessary criteria, so he had something to say there. And he was listened carefully. Because people know a friend is coming, and if he gives us advice, we should listen to it, because this is the kind of advice that might lead us towards modernization, towards membership. So if you come and say, do this, this, and this, but at the end we won't take you, don't expect them to listen. Don't expect them to see you as a friend and to take the advice for serious. So unfortunately, we weakened our situation as European Union in Ankara, which is not good news for us. Because you see in the current struggle that Turkey is going through in the modernization process, that it would be so important for Turkey also to bring the different sides together, army, civil society, government, opposition, and so on, to anchor them in the West and to anchor them in the European Union. I believe this is our job. This is our job as European Unions. But having said that, I know that not, by the way, everywhere in Europe. We tend to generalize the German position and oversee that there are completely different opinions in countries like Sweden, the UK, or other countries. But in countries like Austria, Germany, and France, it's nowadays very, very difficult to explain that, because most of the people are deeply convinced that this is a bad thing to happen, that this is dangerous, and politicians should prevent that from happening. So it's our job to reach out to market squares and tell this to our citizens that it's in our very interest to have Turkey on our side and to anchor them in Europe. But again, because I'm in favor of membership, if they fulfill the necessary criteria, I may be tougher than others who don't want Turkey to become a member. That's why when I go to Ankara, I'm really tough. And I really insist that not only in the capital, but also outside the capital, the Copenhagen criteria has to be practiced. Simply because otherwise I would lose my credibility.
Looking at the current financial situation, if you look at Greece, can the European Union handle Turkey as a new member?
Well, the Turkish bank sector is much better prepared than the Greek one, I should say. I mean, simply because they had a crisis, a deep crisis, as you know. And Kemal Dervish at that time really helped to modernize the Turkish economy, and in particular the bank sector and the financial sector. So Turkey was much more better prepared. And if you look to the current figures of the Turkish economy, they're doing not that bad. I wouldn't go so far as I heard some Greek friends of mine asking me whether the Ottoman Empire could be reestablished in order to solve the Greek economic problems. By the way, it came from Greek friends. I don't want to create news in Germany. Özdemir headline: Ottoman Empire should be reestablished, and then on the fly back I have to step back. This was a joke for all those who didn't understand. I had to learn that as a party leader, you're supposed not to make any kind of ironic remarks or jokes. So the economy in Turkey is on a good path. The biggest problem in Turkey, I would say, is that the imbalances inside Turkey are huge. I mean, to say it a little bit polemic, I would say it's a mixture of Switzerland and Bangladesh currently. But they should arrive at least on the Greek level. And that's what Turkey has to do. So it's still a long way to go for Turkey. But I think a lot of the reforms that Turkey has gone through wouldn't have been possible without Europe to blame for some of the things that were not popular at that time in Turkey. If you take the Kurdish question, if you take some of the other opening processes that the current government and the government before partly has done, just think of the capital punishment. I know a country in the West which still has capital punishment. I think it's this one. And Turkey is not that different. And in that particular case, Turkey had just caught Öcalan, who was the leader of the Kurdish separation movement. And one of the ruling parties at that time, the MHP party, promised to hang him if they come into power. And they were in power, but they didn't hang him. Not only that they didn't hang him, they gave up capital punishment. First in peacetime, and then they went further and said capital punishment is banned forever on every stage. That's not so easy to do that. If you have a public opinion with 70% who thinks capital punishment is a good thing, and in particular to hang that guy is a very good thing. And they simply didn't do it. And they had an extreme right-wing party in power. I know what right-wing parties mean if you look to some European countries like Austria and other parties, and how populist governments behave. In this case, the government did not behave populist. So they really said their citizens, we have to change this, and the price for that, I mean, to hang this guy and to lose European Union, is it really worth to do that? So they behaved relatively rational. Also, Turkey behaved very rational on the Cyprus question. What did they get for it? Well, the South became a member of the European Union, although they behaved un-European and voted against reunification, which was supported by Kofi Annan, by the European Union. And they voted against reunification and became membership. The North, although European Union decided anonymously to lift the embargo, still has the embargo. So that certainly doesn't help the modernizers in Ankara. Because, if you tell your citizens, let's move towards Europe, we have a deal with those guys, and you don't get what they promised, it makes it much tougher than to convince your citizens to continue on that path. And again, let me be clear with that. It is our interest that Turkey moves towards Europe, because there are not that many cases in the world where you have a predominant Muslim society that wants to become a full democracy. I would love that there are tons of countries, waiting in line to become full democracies, but that's unfortunately not the case. So if you have such a case, we should cheer that and welcome that and make sure that this is a success story and it's a model for other countries in the eastern and southeastern border of Turkey. And I can imagine some countries would need such kind of a motivation.
So well, time for one more.
Okay. And now I have to decide.
You have to choose.
I
don't know.
This is so unfair. Shall we collect two or three questions and try to be brief? Let's start with you.
I was just wondering where the Green Party came down on gender equality, both on the German level and the European.
Okay, thanks. Next question. You were next.
Being an automotive engineer and a car nut, I find it really frivolous that a party like yours has a plank of removing speed limits. There's only like 16 autobahns in Germany which actually have no speed limits, and even them have sections which do have speed limits. So I'm surprised that you guys have such a following in Stuttgart. And really,
especially in Stuttgart.
It is retarded that you would even have such a plank. Can you explain that? And I'd be interested to know why.
Okay, thanks. Please. The last two.
At one point in your discussion, you had mentioned that one of the differences between the Green Party and the Social Democrats was basically you don't believe that social justice should be part of it. On that note, I'm curious what your position is. Specifically, the Vice Chancellor got in some hot water as far as some comments he made. On the other hand, there just does seem to be some sort of self-evident, inequality when people are unemployed and seeing benefits that are greater than people who are working. And so I'm just curious what your
Thanks. And then you were the last one.
If you could also say a bit about the German healthcare debate, please, and the Green Party position.
Oh my God! So that's.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking the same.
Your choice.
And this in one sentence. So let me be extremely brief, and then maybe we can continue afterwards with some water. Well, first of all, gender equality. This is one of the crucial points of the Green Party to fight for gender equality. We even went so far that we're the only party having in our rules 2 leaders, 2 group leaders, not everywhere, but in most of the Länder, and one always has to be a woman. So it can mean 2 women, but never 2 men. On all the party lists, 50% have to be women. So number 1, number 3, number 5, 7, and so on always have to be women, which leads us to a situation that we have more women than men in the parliament. On the European level, this is not everywhere the case, because we don't have a European, umbrella organization that says this is the only way you can be green. So, I mean, there are differences from country to country. The more you go to the south, the more it gets difficult with gender questions. The more you go to the north, the more tougher they get. But we have these discussions also on the European level. The European Green Group in the European Parliament also has 2 spokespersons or chairperson, and one has to be a woman. By the way, we also think that vis-à-vis the economy, it is important that we see more women there on important companies. The first company announced something similar. What Norway did was the German Telecom, announcing that on the board, advisory board, there have to be more women now. And we welcome that and want to change that. Speed limit, well, it's true. Speed limit is an important topic for autobahns, and on some of the autobahns you already have some kind of a speed limit. But if you look to the very heavy accidents, it's clear where they're taking place. And it's also clear, if it's true that we have to do all kinds of measures that are possible in order to achieve something with carbon emissions cuts, we cannot afford to exclude one area. We have to have agriculture as well on board as car industries in every area. So speed limit not only helps us to save people from dying by stupid accidents because they're driving too fast and limits carbon emissions, it's also a very important signal for the car manufacturing industry to produce different cars. One of the reasons why we had these huge difficulties for establishing the catalytic converter in Germany was because we could have done that much earlier, like the US did it. Because our cars are much faster. So we needed different catalytic converters than you have. And the same is true that we need much heavier cars. Because if you have to prepare a car for an accident with 200 kilometers an hour, you need to have the car, obviously. And I still wouldn't like to have an accident with 200 kilometers an hour. And I don't wish it to anybody else. But if you have a speed limit, let's say 130, you can afford to have lighter cars, which helps you to save again carbon emissions and use less gas. Social justice, we had the advantage as Greens that during the debate when we were in power with the Social Democrats, we already opposed some parts of Hartz IV. So it was easier for us to tell a story after the government split and to continue with that. But having said that, we also agree that some of the things at that time that were taken, that took place together with the Greens, with today's knowledge, were wrong. Other parts of Hartz IV certainly are correct, and we still defend them. We had one important party convention in the city of Nuremberg where we discussed our position on Hartz IV, and it helped us to reposition ourselves. For the Social Democrats, this was much more difficult, and it's still extremely difficult for them. And I think it's the right direction that they're currently going with the leadership of Sigmar Gabriel to reposition themselves vis-à-vis Hartz IV. They had to pay an extremely high price. They had to pay an extremely high price with enlarging the left party towards the West. That was the price they paid for that. So it is clear that they have to reposition themselves whether they like it or not, simply because of a lot of Social Democrat hardcore voters had the feeling, right or wrong, that you lose the guarantees of the social welfare system once you're out of the system. And then it goes down, and it goes down very quick. And this is certainly an area where Social Democrats Social Democrats certainly cannot ignore. One of the consequences of that is that we're fighting these days very tough for minimum wages in Germany. I believe that's crucial. Another policy area where we try to agree with Social Democrats is We're pushing that tougher than they do. That I believe the main problem in Germany is not that we have too high taxes. That's a myth which is not true. It is not proven right. But the problem we have is that, what's that in English? Wow. The extra costs that you have to spend for wages. Is that a correct phrase? Does that make sense? The benefits, yes. Like retirement benefits and so on, unemployment insurance, health insurance. That is too high in Germany. So there you have to do something, especially for those who have low wages, because it's less attractive to create jobs and to take jobs there. So this is an area where you could do something to attract people on welfare to take jobs, but also to earn more money and help to create jobs for the business community. So what we suggest is under 2,000 euros, we should subsidize that to make it more attractive to have jobs on that certain level, which would, I think, be a good investment. And the final question with healthcare, well, that's a really tough one because it's a very tough debate. We have to, I'm afraid, follow up in a private conversation. But to briefly sum up, we think that we completely disagree with what the liberals are intending, which is a healthcare system where practically everybody pays the same, whether it's the boss of the company or the driver of the company, and the rest, the social justice, then is taking care of the national budget. Because what it leads to is that you completely depend on the situation of the budget and of the economy. What if your budget is imbalanced as it is today? How do you finance that? We asked the Minister of Finance what that would mean for the super tax of high-income people. And he said that he would raise the tax to 73% or almost 100% for rich people. Even we wouldn't go so far to ask that as part of the progressive side. So it's clear there is no money to finance such a system. Our alternative is that we believe that civil servants and everybody should pay into the healthcare system. And then you would, of course, have more money in the system, but let me be open to you. That's not the final solution. We also have to look where the money is used. I think you can only get a solution for the healthcare system if you look to where the money comes from, but you also have to look in where the money goes to. And there, I think a lot also has to be done. But let me say, the Greens had the Ministry for Health, Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, and now Liberals. And practically all failed. Practically all had to, collapse vis-à-vis the lobby pressure that we received by pharma industry and others. So I believe this is an area where you need a lot of power to do healthcare reform. Having said that, I know the difficulties that you have in this country. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much.